Okay.
I appreciate the call.
But
Thank you very much.
some
That was Party Poet again. Let's go with Amy and Brian. Maybe this is Amy and Brian.
Hey, Jaron.
What's up?
How you doing?
Good. You?
Oh, okay. So just to try to run this real quick, we had an idea about an experiment, and supposedly, if you live on a globe, if you're on the equator, you can go east, you stay on the equator. You go west, you stay on the equator.
Correct.
They said the magnetic pole moves, but you can adjust for that. So actually, if we went to Ecuador, for example, you'd be a little south of the actual equator, and your eastward direction would take you north of the equator through Africa. So if you could get a drone that, you could keep the GPS on it, you could also have a compass on it, and you could have it fly from like a horizon indicator. To just the only job that this drone would do would fly in a straight line. If it flew on a straight line and the Earth was a globe, it would follow this path where they tell us this magnetic north actually is. But if it was something like the Gleason's map, the thing would end up on the southern tip of Africa or into the ice wall somewhere, get shot down on the 60th parallel.
Okay, so do you know how far drones go?
How far?
Yeah. I mean,
well, they have solar ones now that have been in the air for months, supposedly.
Correct. I mean, those are really super expensive. That's not something that we can necessarily afford.
I understand that.
Right, but even if you did,
the hardest thing.
Hold on one second. I just want to explain something.
To use, yeah.
Do you realize that there is no such thing as flying straight? How are you going to fly straight?
If you had it based on a magnetic compass, or also using something like the horizon indicator that the pilots would use in actual planes when they need to go through fog or where they can't see.
Okay, let me explain a little different. So let's say that we're in a wide open plain like Utah. Okay, so there's nothing right, left, straight ahead of you, behind you. There's no mountains. There's nothing. It's just a wide open plain. And the road is a 20-mile circle. Okay, so it's a circle, circumference of 20 miles. And I told you, get in that car and stay straight. I want you to stay straight. Do you realize that you would do a complete circle and wouldn't realize that you made a circle? And that's just 20 miles. 20 miles, you would have no...
I think they could make a drone fly in a straight line, though.
I don't know what you mean by that. What do you mean straight line? Straight, there is no...
I mean that once it took off, its only job would be to continue in a straight line.
Right.
However,
but there's wind, there's lots of things that are going to move you off of a straight line.
Right.
And
let's
say that you're following GPS too. GPS is going to do what the globe calls for, right? And you wouldn't even know that that's taking place.
I'm not sure about that. I'm actually not sure about that. I'd like to leave the GPS on and do the same exact thing. I think for them to actually fly right, they have to tell us the GPS is doing something different than it actually does.
In order for it to fly right, the GPS is telling it to do something different than it does?
Right, because if you're saying the GPS would automatically make it into a globe, then the planes couldn't fly right to begin with.
No, GPS is your global positioning system. So what it does is it tells you where you're at on a globe. Right, not where you're at on a flat plane.
I'm not convinced about that, but I understand what you're saying. I think for the planes to be able to use that system, they have to know how to fly right on a flat plane.
Well, yes, planes don't nose down. Planes fly over a level plane. What I'm saying is the GPS gives you your location if you were on a globe. It doesn't affect anything. It doesn't affect your traveling ability or anything like that, because it's simply telling you where you would be on a globe. And it's very easy to use that as proof, right?
Right, but I'm saying if planes were using what they're calling GPS, and we know that planes are flying over a plane,
yes,
then wouldn't that positioning system have to be in real life in terms of what the planes are actually doing it over a plane and not over a globe?
Let me describe it like this. So let's say that we're going to have to scale this down to a realistic size. So let's say that we're talking about your street, okay, the street that you live on or whatever. And let's say that the street is 100 yards. So it's a football field length, right? But now let's say that we're talking about little tiny ants. Okay, so little ants on the street out there. And let's say that it's a flat street, but we want to convince these ants that they live on some sort of a sphere. So we go out and we map out this entire street, and we say, if it was a sphere, it's called a projection, right? So you would project where would this flat plane be on a sphere. So then you create a GPS. Now, if the ant is traveling from one side of the street to the other side of the street, they're traveling on a flat plane. The street is flat. But if the GPS returns to them and their little device that shows them that they're on a sphere, it doesn't change their travel from point A to point B.
Yeah, we're agreeing on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that.
Right. So if you're talking about an equator,
planes are actually using if planes are actually using what they're calling GPS, it works over a flat plane.
Correct.
Because we're not on a globe.
Correct.
So I'm saying that I don't think that whether we left the GPS on or not for this type of experiment, if somebody could make a drone fly in a relatively straight line for miles.
What would be a good experiment?
That's the problem is that, in my opinion, the people who need to do the experiment are those claiming to be sure it's a globe. How in the hell do we not have some sort of permanent structure or some sort of experiment that's been put in Utah? You purchased a 4 mile stretch of land, and you do an experiment there, or you do some sort of setup, kind of like a force the level or force the line kind of experiment that school children can go to for field trips. And it would be great to have something like that. To put it on the flat earthers is ridiculous. Then they say things like, oh, you guys could get together and put some money together to do an experiment. It's like, yeah, and you've got the entirety of our tax money where you can do it with it, right? So all of science is funded by what? By grants, by...
Yeah. No, I agree with you, but I mean, I can't sit around and wait for them to do it.
No, well, here's what I'm trying to say about so if the equator on a flat earth is a big circle, which would be about 24,000 miles of circle, right? And on a... Right. And on a globe, it's also a 24,000 mile circle. But the difference is on a globe, you would travel straight and never turn. Whereas on a flat earth, you would be turning the whole time, right?
Exactly.
Okay. But the problem with that is that you would never notice. And that's why I tried to give you the 20-mile example. In 20 miles, you don't notice that you're making a complete circle. So for us to think that in 24,000 miles, you would have no idea. And if the drone is flying by a GPS, then it's going to constantly be making little tiny adjustments as it's going, but we would never know that. It would just say it's flying straight. Why? Because it's flying based off GPS, and GPS would tell you that path is straight. But it still goes...
But I'm saying, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I think if the planes were actually doing that, how could they ever get to their destination?
You're not listening then. So hold on, let me try this again. Hold on, let me try this one more time. So think of a clock. Okay, think of a clock right now with 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay, now think of that clock outer edge as being the equator. Okay, now let's say that a plane is flying from 12 to 6. Okay, so it's going from the point on 12 to the point at 6. Now picture that is a flat traveling, it's on a flat plane. Well, if the GPS makes you think that you're going from 12 to 6 in a circle, but you're actually not, I don't understand what you mean by how does a plane not get to where it's going. Planes know their starting point and their ending point, right?
Right.
So whether or not
my point is that ultimately what they're calling GPS allows planes to get from point A to point B based on our true world.
Correct.
No matter what Google Earth says or whatever diagrams they show us, the planes themselves know how to do it.
Yes.
Right. So it's not even really so much my problem. It's just the idea that magnetic north, there's one place on their globe that if you go east or west, you're always going to be on one line with no deviation. Like you said, you would never go left. You'd never go right. You'd eventually supposedly return to your point. In the real world, as soon as you zeroed out your compass at perfect north from this point on the equator, somewhere down there in Ecuador, the only place that you would end up would be so far south of where you're supposed to end up that it wouldn't even be comparable. And their GPS might agree with me or it might not, but that wouldn't even matter. My point is that there's no way that they could start a plane on their magnetic equator slightly south of the actual equator that they tell us about and ever fly in a straight line and remain along that line. It couldn't happen if they just used a compass.
If they just use, there's compasses are not that exact,
So,
but unless you're talking about some sort of gyro compass or something.
And the best compasses that you could put on your little drone, whatever that you could put on. The idea would be that in one
Okay, but hold on
view of the
one second. Just so you
world.
know that
Yeah.
based on their mathematics, even if we're going to go off them, for every 1 degree, do you know how many miles that is?
Yep. Is it like around? I was going to say around 70 or something.
I think 70 is correct. Okay, so think
Yeah.
about that. That's 70 miles is 1 degree. So when you're talking about a compass and
Yeah.
flying straight, that if you were flying straight and going around this 24,000 mile circle, you would only be changing your heading 1 degree every 70 miles. That is imperceptible to anyone ever. It's impossible to imagine that you could fly straight and know whether or not you're deviating 1 degree over 70 miles. You wouldn't be able to do that over 1 mile.
Right. I'm agreeing with you there, but wouldn't the variation be both north and south of your line sort of equally over a certain number of trials? You know, if you did this thing 100 times, you're going to be 1 degree this way, 1 degree that way. You know, you do this for 10 hours at a time, however fast these things fly. And there's going to be, after so many trials, you're going to know if you're along their line or if you're far south of it, as you always would be.
I will bring it up to people. I'll maybe bring it up on Globebusters, but I can't see it simply because I go back to that 20-mile thing. And 20 miles, you would have your steering wheel. Your steering wheel would be completely straight the entire time. You wouldn't deviate your steering wheel one little bit, and you would make a complete circle, come back to where you started in 20 miles. So if we couldn't tell that kind of so we couldn't tell that kind of change.
Wouldn't you vary both ways? Supposedly, you know, you're in there, you might have air current this way, that way. It throws you off a little course this way. It throws you off. They have computer technology. They look at the horizon, and you have this compass that is always trying to force your drone east.
The compass would be forcing the drone where the GPS tells it to go.
No, you have the GPS on or not on. I mean, whoever builds this drone, somebody in the custom drone building world, would make it fly based solely on the compass. They can use their GPS for positioning. They can do whatever they want with it, but it's only allowed to fly based on the horizon and based on whatever magnetic east would be.
Gotcha.
From its initial takeoff.
I think it's a lot harder than we think, but that's all. I think it's in theory it works, and that's, I mean, it's one of the biggest ones. I've always said, like, can't we go down with a boat and start to travel down near Antarctica and see if we're turning left or are we turning right? Right? If you're going east on a globe, you'd be turning right. If you're going east on a flat Earth, you'd be turning left. But again, if it's 1 degree of change in 70 miles in a boat that's going 4 or 5 knots, you're talking about 35 hours to go. Wait, am I off on that one? So it's 5 knots per hour, and if we're going 70 miles, so yeah, I mean that's ridiculous. That's 10, 20. So I mean, you're talking about almost a whole day of travel, and you have to determine whether or not you changed 1 degree.
Yeah,
that's
I've
pretty sharp.
Googled custom drone makers and stuff, and I've popped some emails out, and no one's gotten back to me anyways. So if you know anyone that knows how to build drones, you can put solar panels on them. I might.
We'll call Dave Weiss. Tell Dave Weiss to do it. All right. Well, thanks for the call. I appreciate it. And it is the one way that I think is a good proof. I just don't know how you do it. I don't know. And this is why I think whoever got to GPS first, controls the world, right? Because there is no disproving GPS, because they can just say, well, it tells you where you're at. Yeah, I know it tells me where I would be on a globe, but what if I don't think I'm on a globe? Well, you have to be, because otherwise how would it work? Well, because you projected a flat plane onto it.
It tells the planes where they are on this plane. The planes have to know, otherwise there'd be planes crashing all over the place.
No, the computer can keep planes away from each other. It doesn't need it's even if the GPS itself believes it's on a globe, it still can get point A to point B.
Exactly. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
The GPS, and everybody can believe that it's working because we're on a globe, but the true positioning system that planes use has to be based on our true Earth.
Yes, which is what a projection is, right? So if the Earth was a flat Earth and then they projected it onto a sphere and then created GPS around that projection, it does tell you where you're at on a flat plane.
Right.
So things can still work. Things still operate the exact same. It's just the implication is that you live on a globe.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
All right, man.
Nice talking to you. Sorry,
Thanks.
I know I'm taking calls for way too long. Let's try. Nope. I guess we're done with this. So I'm going to turn off the phone lines because I've cost myself a ridiculous amount of money. That is, I got to find out how that seems wrong. Holy smokes. Let me get out of here. Stop this. Turn this off. Let's hang up. Thank you. Goodbye. Phone lines are closed. Let me fix this little image here, which is where image. Yep. And let me alt that one down. Now we just got the tiny URL open. There we go. Fix that. And let's see if there's any more text messages real quick. Make sure we got all those. Yes, all the text messages are clear. Let's go back over to see if there's anybody waiting on StreamYard. Got 2 people. Doug in the house. What up, Doug?
What's up, brother?
How are you? How are the ladies?
They're doing good, doing good.
Nice.
Man, that guy before you, he kept saying, I understand, but he didn't understand.
I know. Am I way off on that one, or I just don't know how to explain it any better? I
No.
got to kind of figure out a way to explain it
Well,
better.
I would have said a couple things different. Like, guy, yes, the compass is going to show west, but it's turning ever so slightly and you won't notice it.
Right.
You know, you're going to follow the compass, sure, but it's not going to keep going in a straight line out to south of Africa, whether it's a globe or an Earth. I mean, it's gonna appear the same. You're going to think you're going straight.
Yeah, there just is. I mean,
It's
I've
just
thought
easy.
about it before. One way you could determine what straight is with a string, right? I mean, but then you're just talking about ridiculousness. You're not going to get a string that's 70 miles, and even in that 70 miles, you only deviated 1 degree. But if you could fly like something on a string, you know, and the ways I've thought about this before is because everybody says, oh, you know, on a sphere, we can go out and measure and we can do a triangle and it's bigger than 180 degrees. Well, yeah, that's in theory, and you can draw that on Google Earth. Great. But in reality, you could never actually do that test because you can't keep straight for a certain amount of distance. The thought of it is kind of funny. So
You can't verify it, no.
no, unless we took string. Like, let's say we had, 3,000 miles in string. And so we went out and did 1,000 mile string